You're listening to the Core Connections podcast, and I'm your host, Erica Zeal. Having been in the fitness and wellness space for almost 20 years, a published author and creator of the Knocked Up Fitness brand, prenatal program, and my core rehab program, I'm obsessed with helping you up-level your health, your wellness, and ultimately your life. When we approach life with an open mind and a willingness to see what we can learn about life around us and our own body, you can truly amaze yourself. We don't know what we don't know, and the best way to find out is to embrace where you are today and be open to exploring possibilities. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad you are here and thrilled to share with you today's episode. Today, I'm going to be talking about hormones and the shifts that take place during pregnancy and early postpartum. And we're actually going to start with preparing for pregnancy. And this is something I actually feel like I really want to talk so much more about because there's so much that a woman can be doing in the time frame, whatever that is for you, in preparing for pregnancy. And when we start looking at, things that we're doing, and even if you've already had a baby or 2 or 3 or 5, and this all applies to you as well, right? So we need to look at our stress, right? I'm a big fan of us all doing our best to minimize our stress. And this is so important when we talk about during the years of having babies. Like it is so, and you're going to really understand more about it today. I'm going to connect those dots for you from a hormone perspective. Obviously sleep, doing our best to really start to create amazing, healthy lifestyle habits before we even get pregnant, right? I know that's not always possible, but for those of you that it is, that's amazing. And for those of you that get pregnant and it may be unplanned, that's okay because it's never too late. You can always start working on these things even once you are pregnant or even once you're postpartum, right? Or you've already had a couple babies. It doesn't matter, okay? It's better to have the information now, right, than not ever getting it. So obviously our sleep, really doing our best to creating good sleep patterns in that pre-pregnancy phase of our life, getting our nutrition dialed in so that we're going into pregnancy being really nourished, because baby will take from your body what baby needs, and then who is left depleted? It's mom. Looking at our environment, right? Are we working to switch out our beauty products, our cleaning products, our candles, our anything in our house that has a fragrant in it that's not natural or not from essential oils, things like that, is probably a toxin and can really cause disruption with your hormones. Really important that we really start switching out our products that we're using throughout our day, because that can just really help up level your health. Do you have a regular cycle? Right? That can be an indication of, are you ovulating? Are things regular? Are your hormones where they need to be and to optimally, hopefully get pregnant when you're planning to? How's your energy? How's your mood? Do you have a previous use of birth control, right? How long ago has that been? There's just all these things to start to be aware of, right? We don't need to go over the top. I'm here to just bring awareness to things and pick and do what you can do right now. But some hormones that's would be really good to have these labs and these numbers before you get pregnant, because it can really show and indicate areas where, we really need to boost our body up here, or it shows that our cortisol rhythm, our cortisol diurnal rhythm, right, that is just not where we really ideally want it to be. So we could start working on some of these things before you even get pregnant. Like in a perfect world, that would be amazing for every single one of us to have done that. Those of you that still have the opportunity to do that, that would be amazing. So, doing something like the Dutch test, which I'm really excited now that I get to offer that to my students. If you're working with a functional med doctor, naturopath, or have someone in your area or that you're already working with, asking them to order you a Dutch test, or so that you can go ahead and get a pre-pregnancy labs run, also checking your your thyroid levels, and also checking antibodies would be really good. Your thyroid antibodies before getting pregnant, your insulin levels, and you're going to get your cortisol levels, your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, melatonin. We're going to get all of those on a Dutch test. Plus, it shows metabolites, so it can really, really show a lot of what's going on in your body. And if you're having symptoms, PMS, acne, maybe signs of PCOS, things like that, before even getting pregnant, you could start to think those around before you do get pregnant. And it can just help you set you up for an even better pregnancy, because there's a lot of stuff that takes place during pregnancy. And we're going to talk about specifically some of those hormones, because as I've been learning this, I can geek out on all this, right? It really connected a lot of dots for me, because I know that many of you listening are dealing with autoimmunity, and Hashimoto's is a big one. And when we understand what takes place during pregnancy and then what happens postpartum, it helps explain why that's happening and why it's so important to get control over as many things as we can prior to getting pregnant, during pregnancy, and then postpartum, right? And there's obviously things that are out of your control, but I'm a big believer, like, knowledge is power, right? So when we can get some lab work, it can show a little more insight in what's going on in our body. So really, really important things to understand, and things that you can do prior to even getting pregnant. It's also important to understand our progesterone levels prior to getting pregnant, and making sure that you are ovulating. And then progesterone is really important in the very beginning of pregnancy to help encourage implantation, to making sure that that embryo gets implanted in the uterus, right? So it's really, really important. Understanding that our estrogen levels really start to rise during pregnancy. Progesterone should be going up in early stages of pregnancy. And then our body starts to really increase HCG, right? Which this helps in the development of the egg inside the ovary, which eventually forms the placenta as well. During pregnancy, our cortisol levels dramatically rise, and that's in part because the placenta is really signaling to our HPA axis to create more cortisol. So some of our hormones that's created in mom's body is actually starting to come from the placenta. And so something that can cause, right, during pregnancy, if we've got really high levels of cortisol and we're under a lot of stress, that's where we can start to get some things to go a little wonky, right? Because if you haven't listened to my stress episode, I would highly recommend listening to that. I won't go too deep into it today, but our HPA axis is where our creation of cortisol comes from. It's from our brain telling our body we need to create more cortisol. So when we become more stressed, the initial phase is that our body does create more cortisol. But if we've already been highly stressed, and probably before pregnancy, because it typically is a longer period of time, then what can happen, our body isn't actually making enough cortisol. So just something to be aware of. And then let's go in and talk about, what happens with delivery, with birth, right? So this is really a cool thing to understand that, right? Like right away, when our bodies, it's time for labor, our body starts having contractions, that relaxin increases even more. And you've heard me talk about relaxin because it comes up in conversation when we're talking about our movement practice, right? We need to be careful we don't overstretch, and things like that. So when we're in labor, relaxin hormone is going up even more so that our pelvis can open, so baby can descend and eventually come out of the birth canal, or that's the intended goal, right? But here's the interesting thing, is that it's actually baby that initiates a strong release of cortisol hormones through its HPA axis communication. It's a baby saying, hey, it's time to get me out of here. So it is signaling to mom. It causes this upregulation of oxytocin, right? Which we know is really, really important, but it causes a huge drop in progesterone for mom. So we know as soon as we have a baby, our progesterone just plummets. And because of that plummet, our body temporarily is in this estrogen dominance because our progesterone plummets first, and we still have all this estrogen in our body, which then that is what sets off a release of prostaglandins to help with uterine contractions. So interesting that it's actually baby that kind of sets off the whole labor events, right? So then we enter that early postpartum phase. And the reason I like to call it early postpartum is because, again, once you're postpartum, you are technically always postpartum, but we don't really talk about that in society. So early postpartum is looked at as 6 to 12 weeks after birth, from a hormone perspective too, and this can mimic menopause because these hormone changes happened like super dramatically, right? It's like as soon as your body's kicking into labor, your progesterone plummets. You still have estrogen, right? Because that's what's helping those uterine contractions. But then once baby is born, your estrogen drops too. So now your body's like, no progesterone, not no, but it's really low levels of estrogen. Our oxytocin levels are rising, which is a really good thing. And it's impulsing, right? So we talk about, and it has to do with the nursing and lactation, right? So those of you that have had babies know how this happens, right? When you're nursing, that can stimulate the uterine contractions. That uterus is shrinking back down. And it also increases the prolactin, which is what is helping with the lactation. So this is where when we get into early postpartum and we're, trying to nurse, and yet we have like no hormones. So we're really kind of riding on our oxytocin to kind of keep us, happy and moving forward in those early postpartum weeks. So the reason I want to talk about this a little bit too is to understand the hormone shifts that are typical in the early postpartum phase. And so you're not crazy when you feel the way that you do. And to understand that there are things that you can do. And this is why I'm a firm believer, this is where I've fallen in love. I know you guys are tired of me talking about this, but fallen in love with understanding and knowing how to read the Dutch test and what to do about it and how to help women, because it's helped me so much personally. And the deeper I get into all this, I love it, because this is so incredible that we can have this information so that I can help share this amazing information with all of you. You can, find someone to work with to help guide you through this. So, and here's the other thing with this is those hormones, depending upon your body, they could last up to 4 years or more postpartum, right? So this is where it can be really important, especially the longer things are lingering, the longer symptoms are lingering for you postpartum. It's really, really important to get some testing done, because it might not be that complex of something going on, and our body needs a little bit more support. I'm going to talk about support too right at the very end, some supplemental support and some things that I believe are really, really, really important. So I do want to briefly mention some symptoms that have come here from the CDC of what could be indication of postpartum depression, because I think it's really important to mention this, because I want you to understand that there is something that you can do about it. It's not all in your head. There are these huge shifts that take place during pregnancy and then postpartum, right? Just our hormones plummet. And because everybody's bodies are different, if some of your levels aren't leveling out, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, to know that there are some things that you can do. So crying more often than usual, feelings of anger, withdrawal from loved ones, feeling numb or disconnected, worrying you will hurt your baby, feeling guilty about not being a good mom or having the ability to care for your baby. And the CDC says that 1 out of 10 women suffer with general depression, and 1 out of 8 women will suffer with postpartum depression. So just again, something to be aware of. Again, so to understand more of what's going on with our postpartum body, it's really important to understand our thyroid function. So again, making sure, if you can, like pre-pregnancy, getting your thyroid labs run, and then getting your thyroid labs run during pregnancy, because our thyroid manages our metabolism. And pregnancy really is like, just puts a high demand on our body's metabolism. And so our thyroid function should return to pre-pregnancy levels around that 4 to 6 weeks postpartum. But to understand that imbalances in our thyroid may contribute to mood and mood dysfunction, right? That feeling of depression or anxiety or extreme fatigue and things like that, right? So that's why it's so important to encourage getting your doctor, your OBGYN, to order thyroid labs for you and having them looked at fairly regularly, right? Because you are having shifts that are taking. So when you're going to that doctor at that 4 to 6 week postpartum checkup, I would be having a conversation with her to say, I need to get all my thyroid labs ordered and antibody thyroid, right? Checking for Hashimoto's. Because some common thyroid imbalances that can linger or can be there postpartum is hyperthyroid function, right? So where your metabolism is just staying revved up longer than it should be, right? Or increased autoimmune thyroid reactivity. Hashimoto's is the more common one. Graves is an autoimmune thyroid, but it's not as common as Hashimoto's. And then hypothyroid could be there in part because you have too much, your estrogen dominance, and understanding that you don't have to have crazy high levels of estrogen to be estrogen dominant. It just means that in relationship to your progesterone, your estrogen is really high. Okay. I am someone who has dealt with estrogen dominance, but I by no means have high hormone levels. I do not have high estrogen at all. I actually have on the lower side of estrogen, but because my progesterone is still so low, my body can act a little estrogen dominance. Now, obviously, I've been working on it, right? But understanding it's that balance of hormones as well, because so many times we think of estrogen dominance of like we have got to have a lot of estrogen in our body. That's not necessarily the case. And as a side note, we actually can have I think it's like about 5 times the amount of estrogen in our uterus, ovary area, versus just free circulating around our body. So that's also why you can do, serum lab draws to test your estrogen progesterone levels. You can absolutely do that. Everything that I am learning and discovering, and I have personally done with labs for myself, the Dutch test shows you so much more. It really shows you a lot more information. So there's a lot more to work with in understanding what's going on in the body. Sometimes you just need a little extra support in places to help metabolize your hormones as well. Now let's talk about cortisol. This one actually really excites me to understand more and more about cortisol, right? And again, we hear about cortisol being connected with stress, right? High levels of stress can cause high levels of cortisol. Well, that's where it starts. But in time, it actually can cause your cortisol to plummet and not create enough. But let's talk about what happens with cortisol during pregnancy. So cortisol increases during pregnancy. And this can actually be a contributor or a risk for postpartum depression. And part of it is during pregnancy, our placenta is helping to contribute to that creation of higher levels of cortisol during pregnancy. But understanding that postpartum, if our cortisol, or even more important, our diurnal rhythm of our cortisol is not in that diurnal rhythm, and maybe it's all over the place. Maybe our cortisol has plummeted. Maybe our cortisol is still way too high. Like there's just different things that could be going on. Like that's can play a huge role in how you're feeling. It may or may not be your typical progesterone, estrogen, thyroid hormones as much as you might think it is. It could be your cortisol, right? What's going on with your cortisol rhythm throughout your day? And so think of it like this. When I heard this, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so, so true, right? So if our HPA or HPA axis dysregulation is common with pregnancy because the placenta, the baby, is causing our HPA axis to create more cortisol. But when was the last time a baby followed a typical sleep schedule? Right? We think of our sleep-wake cycle, right? That's why it's so important for cortisol that we have a fairly regular sleep-wake cycle. Well, how many of you during pregnancy had a hard time sleeping or going to bed at night? Might have been your cortisol, right? How many of you, when you would go to bed at night and baby is just kicking like crazy, baby is wide awake at night and you're like, come on, kid, just go to sleep. Mom wants to sleep, right? So think of how that could continue a little bit after baby is born because we've got all this push up of pumping out of cortisol of our body. And we've got this dysregulation that could be going on, lingering over from pregnancy. That could be some of what's going on with contributing to how we are feeling postpartum. I don't know. I think that's fascinating to understand and know that because there's things that we can do to help rebalance out our cortisol, right? So connecting the dots that an increase in cortisol can be correlated to autoimmune inflammation. Because I've been kind of on this journey to help women figure this out. Like, why are so many women getting autoimmune diseases after having a baby? Or if you have autoimmunity, it can many times actually be better during pregnancy. Symptoms will lessen during pregnancy just because you have so much more like superpowers when you're pregnant. I mean, I say that wholeheartedly. I'm always like, mom is so much better protected when she's pregnant. But then after you have your baby, your autoimmune symptoms could just come back like with a vengeance. Well, a lot of that can come back to your cortisol because cortisol is related to inflammation. So we have to be aware of what's going on with our cortisol. And this is, again, why getting our cortisol levels checked postpartum could be really, really, really insightful and be like, oh, that's why I feel the way I do. I'm really not crazy, right? Like, I mean, I've had 3 babies. I've been through this a couple times. I remember those postpartum periods, and especially with my third, I look back now and I know I had postpartum with her, but I didn't realize it at the time because my youngest now, she's almost 9. And we weren't talking about this stuff. And the Dutch test didn't even exist then. And I just remember I had feelings of like anger and it was horrible. I didn't feel like myself. And I was probably one of those that I probably actually should have quit nursing sooner than I did, but I didn't realize it. It's just one of those, you just keep going, one foot in front of the other. You're working, you've got 2 other kids and a baby to help survive, right? Like thrive, right? So there's like so much going on and you're just like, this is just, it is what it is. You don't even think much about it. And you literally have one appointment with a doctor for yourself and the rest of the doctor's visits are for the baby. Right? Which is good and important, but mom kind of gets neglected along the way. So this is why it's really important to like understand this. Share this episode, ladies. We're not done yet, but I just like get passionate about this. Like share this with other women in your lives because this stuff is so powerful to start to know like, oh, wow, I'm not crazy. There are things that I can be doing to help shift some of this, right? Now, we do have to take into account if you're nursing postpartum. I know many of you are asking, well, Erica, what can we do if we're nursing, right? So like I look back at, I think I nursed her to about 11 months and about 1 to 2 months after I quit nursing her, it was like, boom, some light bulb came back on in my life. And I was like, whoa, I remember having this thought of, I should have probably stopped nursing her a little bit sooner because it really like, I had that kind of loss of like who I was and that loss of like self, right? Can be really, really, really common postpartum. And of course, it's okay to a point to push through that. But starting to recognize when we get to a point that, wow, I'm really not I'm not thriving? And at what point do we make some decisions to be like, yeah, maybe it's time to quit nursing. My baby is 6 months old, or I've almost got to a year, or heck, maybe you're in that really early newborn stage and you're like, it's just not working. It is okay. You have the choice, and it is okay. You are not a bad person if you're like, I needed to get some more progesterone in my body, which meant I had to quit nursing because I was not doing well, right? So sometimes we have to make those hard choices, and they're hard, but ultimately you have that choice. Listen to your intuition, don't let other people influence your choices. It's your choice. It's your body. It's your life. So if you choose that, no, I'm going to suck this up and we're going to push through and I'm going to nurse my baby as long as I can, or I'm going to make it to 3 months or 6 months or a year, or you know what? I'm struggling and I need to get my hormones checked. And if stuff comes back and it shows that, like my cortisol isn't that all over the place and it really comes down to like, I could use some of that progesterone hormone to help me, then maybe that's what you need to do, right? And maybe not. It's totally up to you. I just wanted to put that out there because I feel like so many times we can try to live up to other people's standards or something that we had conjured up in our mind before having babies of like that perfect, it's going to go this perfect way. And there's no such thing as perfection. That's why I love, like last week I talked about like letting our intuition shine through. You will be a happier person when you learn to follow your intuition a little bit more, because then you're making the right decision for you, for your baby, for your family, right? Whatever it is. Okay, so a couple other things I want to mention just to bring awareness to is, besides the inflammation and stress, making it hard for our body to make serotonin, which is our feel-good hormone, right? So this is why it's really important that we are nourishing our body well. We are doing our best to get what sleep that we can. I know it's easier said than done, but this is where I'm going to give you all that nudge and that push. Ask for help. Ask for help because your health can depend upon it. Having someone just help you once in a while so you can get a little bit more sleep. Even if it means a full chunk of 4 hours instead of like a broken up 2 and 2, like I always feel like if you at least in that newborn stage can get a full 4 hours, you go through that whole sleep cycle. That can be super, super, super powerful for you. And it might mean you got to get creative with maybe you've got a pump right before bed so your partner can get up and feed the baby and then you get up at the next one, right? You alternate, like get creative, ask for help. Please ask for help. It is for your your own best interest in your health and wellness. But understanding that stress and having too much inflammation or a lot of inflammation in our body makes it really hard for us to make serotonin. Serotonin is involved in us making melatonin, which is involved in us helping in us getting better sleep, right? So it's very, very it's all so interconnected, ladies. And if our oxytocin levels are low, and we've got high stress, that could be setting us up for more postpartum. And I know you can get blood serum tests of oxytocin levels, or it could also be if you're clearing oxytocin out of your body too fast. And so those are some things to possibly look into. And also if you have high testosterone can be a risk for postpartum depression. So that's again understanding your hormone levels and getting them checked postpartum can be very, very helpful. And then having those tests pre-pregnancy, again, to know where you are before getting pregnant, super helpful. And you may, postpartum, your doctor may want to put you on some estradiol support, like just a small amount, because that could help your serotonin levels, which again, very, very, very important. If we are not having ideal serotonin levels in our body, that could totally affect how you're feeling. It could be totally affect how you're sleeping. But just being on top of your nutrition, checking your hormones. Where are you at with your supplement support? So I'm going to share some supplement recommendations at the very end. Stress management, cortisol regulation, all very, very, very important. So now you're thinking, Eric, okay, well, should I get tested? I'm feeling pretty good. I don't know. So postpartum, when would you want to test for all of this? I think, of course, getting your thyroid tested, asking your doctor to do that. In that your 6-ish week visit, right? Because hopefully your thyroid is balancing and normalizing back out about then, so you can see where it's at. That would be something really important to do in that 6-ish weeks or so. But then after that, if you're having symptoms, if things aren't balancing out, and you're you're basically I'm eating pretty well. It's not about perfection. I'm eating pretty well. For having a newborn, I'm sleeping okay. And, those types of things. And if things are just really feeling off for you and your intuition says there's something there, trust your intuition and ask for help and go, to your doctor or work with someone who can order you a Dutch test and get some insight to then know some things that you could start doing. So let's talk about supplementation. I know many of you have lots of questions. You're like, Erica, so what should we be taking if we're postpartum and we're still nursing? Okay, so obviously if you're not nursing, you have more flexibility on supplements and things that you can be taking and hormones and things like that. If you are nursing, you have to be really careful with adding progesterone or taking or adding anything that can help boost progesterone naturally, which could even be some essential oils that are supposed to naturally stimulate your progesterone. So even any oils that can stimulate progesterone, you do have to be careful with that because if you're wanting to nurse and continue nursing, so you have to be cautious and aware that if we're going to start messing with progesterone, it could mean that your milk production will go down or completely stop. So that's a decision that you have to make and decide if, weigh the pros and cons on both sides. And for some, you may just need to because you just really are not feeling good at all. And for others of you, there's other things that you can be working on, like I talked about, your cortisol, your sleep, there's so many other things as well. So and as always with any supplements, always start small, only start one at a time so you can test it out to make sure that your body responds well. It doesn't seem to affect baby at all. You can take some 5-HTP. Of course, always run these by your physician while breastfeeding. Again, just always making sure you start with the lowest dose because that can help support your serotonin, which of course can help your sleep, right? So just again, sleep is so important. And I know it's very hard postpartum to get good sleep. Been there, done that. I feel like I wish I would have known some of this when I was having my babies, or actually a lot of this. So as far as a regular balanced supplement support that I would recommend, of course, run by your doctor, but electrolytes are really important, making sure you're staying hydrated. We can drink a lot of water, and you might still feel dehydrated. And it just could be because you have a mineral imbalance. So that's where electrolytes can be very beneficial. And taking a good omega support, very important, not just it's good for inflammation, decreasing inflammation. It is so good for your brain support, so good for baby's development. So do not stop taking a good solid omega support while you are nursing. And I would continue on after, especially if you're planning on having more babies, because again, I'll remind you all, baby will take from us what baby needs. And so then mom is left depleted. So here's how I want you to look at that postpartum, or in between babies. Part of what your job is to replenish your stores in your body. A big thing of that is your brain. Do not stop taking omegas. Do not stop eating good, healthy fats because your brain needs that. Because especially if you plan to get pregnant again in the future, and we start off a little depleted, you become even more depleted with each baby. So it's super, super important. We spend that time in between having babies really, really working to replenish your nutrient stores in your body. Taking a good quality multivitamin. I have some that I love taking that I think I recommend from Holistic Heal with Amy Yasko, because she does a lot of stuff with genetic pathways, and so does Ben Lynch with Seeking Health. Those are always my recommendation because you just never know. I mean, we could go super deep dive and like break down your genetics and all that, but you can also just try experimenting a little bit and be like, wait, do I feel better on this supplement because it has more things in it? And one thing I do like about Holistic Heal, which is the one I take, is it's low dose. So you don't have to worry about getting too much of anything, but it's low dose. And she's got a lot of little added nutrients and things in there that help with that genetic transport. So we're actually uptaking all those amazing nutrients that we are getting into our cells, right? And then, if you're having trouble sleeping at night, some magnesium. And again, run all of these stuff by your doctor, or if you're taking, of course, any medications and things like that. And you know what to do, especially if you're on thyroid support, because I know that needs to be taken typically first thing in the morning and you don't eat and all of that. So, having those conversations with your doctor or your naturopath or whoever you're working with to run labs and your OBGYN, because obviously that's really important. But at the end of the day, I really, really want to just encourage all of you to take your health into your own hands. If something comes up at a doctor visit or within a conversation and you're like, you kind of get that intuitive feeling of like, I'm not really sure about that, or this feels a little off to me, like, please, by all means, trust that intuition. Go deeper. Start doing a little bit of research on your own. Feel free to reach out and ask me if you have a specific question. I'm happy to, bring on an expert that can go deeper in some of these conversations if we need to, or I will dig up some research and we can go deeper on some of this. But hopefully this was helpful at just giving you a good overview and thinking deeper about hormones and the shifts that are taking place, and to know that there's legitimately probably a reason that postpartum you feel the way that you do. So let's look into it. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I would love for you to share this episode with a friend that you know could benefit from just learning more about our hormones and better preparation for pregnancy and postpartum and in between having babies. And if you're interested in, working with me, doing one-on-one coaching, health coaching, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Erica Zeal, or if you get my weekly newsletter, you're welcome to reply to any of those emails. And I just want to thank you all so much for tuning in today. I am so grateful for each and every one of you here listening, and I look forward to seeing you back next week. The material contained within is provided for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. You should seek medical care for any specific health issues and consult your physician before beginning a new regimen or purchasing any products.